Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Grace to All with Paul Gray. And I'm really looking forward today because I'm going to get to know him much better too. Our guest is Tommy Miller from Ohio. Tommy, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Very honored and humbled. Thank you so much.
It's mutual. And sometimes people I interview, I know and I've interacted with for quite a while. Some I've even interviewed before, but this is a brand new experience for me with Tommy. And he was highly recommended to me by our mutual friend, Don Keithley. And so hopefully we'll do our best to make Don proud of both of us today. But again, I'm going to learn as much about Tommy as you guys are. And so Tommy, just tell us to begin with where you are and what you do, and then we'll get to how that came about.
Sure. So my wife and I, Miss Shanda Miller, founded Legacy Church in New Philadelphia, Ohio, about 8 years ago. 3 years into that church, we started a school because we were really passionate about being able to offer the revelation that I know Paul's very familiar with and Don Keithley's familiar with. Sometimes that stuff isn't always fit for public consumption. You know, a lot of times traditional Western religion isn't always palatable to people. So we wanted to not withhold what we had to offer, but kind of give it more of a focused place to land. So we started the school. And when students come into the school, they can't really leave it. So they just kind of have to reconcile and deal with the things that they're contemplating. So we have a local church that functions like a local church, but it has the environment of a grace community. Then we have the school for people that are willing to open their minds a little bit to some things that might push against the Western paradigm a little. So we have 2 sons, 2 beautiful daughters-in-law, and 4 beautiful granddaughters that take most of our time and all of our affection. We absolutely love them, and our family is just a testimony of God's goodness.
You look like you're about 30, so how is that possible?
Well, if you really want to know, that could be a good part of the interview. I'm 35, and when I was 19 years old, I was a drug dealer and a bouncer at a gentleman's club. And one of the dancers at the club and I started a relationship. She's 10 years older than I am. So we got married 4 months later. The beginning of our marriage was an absolute failure. And then God came in and completely turned our lives and our kids around. Our marriage is the best marriage I've ever seen. We've been married for 15 years now. We have a home that reflects God's grace. We have 2 sons that walk in the Lord and lead their families in grace. And so when my wife and I got married, my sons were 9 and 11. So I get that comment often, but our testimony, the reason I know grace works is because I'm a living example of it. You know, you can't get to where we are from where we were without a lot of goodness.
Wow. I thought I had a story. You got a story, my friend. I tell people that I took the traditional route into ministry. I was a jazz musician and nightclub owner.
That's fantastic.
We have some I actually played 2 nights a week for a couple of years with my band at a gentleman's club. The behavior there wasn't very gentlemanly. But,
right. The best ones get started, I guess.
Yeah. Gosh, well, we got a lot in common. So you're so that shows how you can look so young and have kids that old. And so are your sons, it sounds like they're on this same unconditional love and grace finished work journey that you're on.
They absolutely are. They're fantastic men. I'd say one of the strange things to reconcile was we hurt them with religion when we were first saved, and that kind of pushed them away for a while, and then completely changing our paradigm to radical grace and God's love. It was really hard to approach our kids and say, listen, we've got a lot to apologize for, but I promise what you hear from us now is truth, and it's not painful. So yeah, both of our sons kindly heard us out, and yeah, both of them lead their wives and their kids with grace. It's wow. A beautiful thing.
Well, are they in the same area that you're in?
Oh, they live
They,
within 10 miles of me and a quarter mile of each other.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, tell us how this happened, how Grace got a hold of you.
Okay. It's a good story. And it's probably a lot like a lot of the folks that are listening. I was about ready to give up the ministry. My wife and I started out, like I said, as a bouncer in a gentleman's club. At the time, I was a national level bodybuilding competitor. And I was very sure of myself, just didn't need a whole lot. And I always thought that Jesus was a crutch for people that couldn't make it.
Mm.
So the way it got started in the beginning was my son, who was 11 at the time, my youngest son, visited a youth camp. And my youngest son has one heck of an attitude. He's redheaded. He's witty. He's quick on the draw, and he's just, I don't know. He's your stereotypical redhead. You know, he can stand toe to toe with you and not back down. And when he came back from this encounter that he had with God, he was a completely different guy. And I couldn't believe it. And, you know, like kind of like I started, my wife and I, our marriage was on the outs at least once a week, if not more. At that time, we were deciding who got the dog. That means, you know, conversations were really serious. And my son, who, you know, obviously he's from her first marriage, which you'd never be able to tell that now. They're as much my son's as I am God's. And he said, if you don't take me to church, I am going to move in with my biological dad, because he could walk there from, like, he made a stand. And in my pride and arrogance, I took him. And by the end of the first service, I was done for. Like, the goodness of God had completely overwhelmed me. And honestly, I never looked back. But as you can imagine, I heard everything through my paradigm, which was traditional Western, heaven, hell, right, wrong, behavior modification. Even though they might have been saying the wrong things, you just sometimes don't have the paradigm to hear it. So fast forward 3 years, my wife and I are in the ministry, and the sure of myself, confident guy that I was reduced to worse than I ever was before I met the Lord. I would preach a message and we'd get out to the car and she'd just be dreading it, and she'd know what I was about to say. I was going to say, how did I do today? And then I would just cry and say, they're all going to leave because of my preaching. They're all going to leave because somebody didn't get healed. And just the performance after I got saved was so much worse than the performance beforehand. And I think I would have traded my salvation to go back to not knowing.
Wow.
Because the pressure of religion was so much more painful. But I had a moment that all of this changed, and that's been 8 years ago. I was playing guitar, hired to play guitar for another worship band at a conference, and there was a gentleman in from Dallas. And the week before, I was called to a hospital to pray for a young man that had spinal meningitis. He was 19 years old. And they told me he had 2 weeks to live. And I walked into his hospital room and I laid hands on him. And before I left that day, he died. So it was of my opinion that had they not called me, he might have got, he might not have met the same demise. So I was done. You know, the pressure to heal the sick and the pressure to raise the dead. Now I fully believe in, walk in those things and love seeing them now, but it was still from a earning and deserving standpoint. So that guy was preaching that night, the guy from Dallas, and I was only a week past this disappointment. And, you know, there was a line of 100 people up to him. There was a line of 50 people behind us, and we get to, he and his wife, to talk to them. And before we can get anything out of our mouths, he said, do you want to go to dinner? I said, sure. So he had his driver bring the car around. Those other 50 people he left standing there, and somehow we ended up at Applebee's with him. And I told him my story, and he said, that same thing happened to me 5 years ago. I said, well, how'd you get past it? He said, I became a son. And I never considered myself a son of God before. I was always a good servant. I was always, a man of God, but I had never just rested in the house of God because I was too busy working in his field. And at that moment, God spoke something to me that I use as the government for my life now. Sons have favor and slaves have pressure. And I can tell by which one I'm feeling, which covenant I'm walking in. And that was the seed, I'll say, of the ever increasing revelation that came after that. But that was the turning point. Definitively, that was the turning point. I got adopted that day.
Wow. What a story. And you guys, you tell it so well, Tommy. Man,
Thank you.
my gosh. So did you stay connected with that guy?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, his name's Guy Pei. His wife is Ilka Pei. They're out of Dallas. They travel to a couple hundred countries a year, just tremendous people, larger than life personalities. And he's actually larger than life. I think he's 6'8" and Ilka's 6'1". But yeah, they had more to do with our transition than they could ever understand. So
Wow.
yeah.
So that day you became a son, you were adopted in your words. Then what happened after that?
So that's another interesting journey is I thought at that moment that everything was as good as it could be because I came out of bondage and into freedom, and things started changing. I remember laying down to bed at night. I was always extremely studious. I was employed at the time by an insurance company, and I worked remotely. So if I was able to do my remote work, laptop work, and there was gaps in between, I'd be reading my Bible. And I would read from the beginning of Acts to the end of Jude about 5 days a week. And I prided myself in being studious and learning. And I led our youth group through apologetics courses, and it was always almost like Reformed theology, and it wasn't super healthy. But when that happened, my Bible reading became much more intimate. And the odd thing that marked that season in my life is I started learning more in my sleep than I did while I was awake.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. I remember one night I asked God to reveal to me why he cursed the fig tree, because I'd studied it for years and I had all of these great, parabolic understandings of it, but I never understood it. So I was actually asleep in the room next to the one I'm in now, and I laid down. And when I used to lay down at that time, it was just like euphoric. Like there was no stress. For the first time in my life, my mind was quiet at night. I was harboring no guilt, no insecurity, and I just lay down, and it just felt like I'd entered into heaven. But I asked God why he cursed the fig tree, and when I woke up, I knew. And those kind of things happened over and over and over again. And I don't mean to make it sound cosmic or odd, but what he was showing me through that whole time is everything that you've ever strived for is going to be given to you because you're resting now. And he said, yeah, the fig tree was Israel. I actually cursed the system that you used to be in. I can't allow that system of earning and deserving to bear fruit anymore. That's why immediately he said, have God's faith. Anything you believe you received, you have. Resting in a finished work. And I woke up and I had sermon material. I stopped, preparing 25, 30 hours on a sermon. God was able to preach better sermons through me than he did through my efforts in trying. And everything changed. I remember going up to the pulpit and having this understanding that I never had before, because it was always a performance thing. Even if you would lie to yourself and say it wasn't, it was. This is God's message. I'm God's son, and it came from him. And if they don't like it, I'm not the problem. That changed everything. And
man. Yeah. Well, again, what a story. You're talking about the fig tree. One of the things that I was often asked, I still am sometimes, since I am on this new journey, is well, if what you say is true, why did Jesus come? What did he save us from? And if there's no hell, what did he save us from? And the Lord showed me, and I know he's shown lots of other people too, that he saved us from the damnable structure of religion that portrays an angry God that doesn't like people. That's what he saved us on. That's what Jesus came to reveal and to show us. And religious people didn't like it so much they killed him. And today they don't kill us physically, but they sure try to get rid of us.
Yeah.
when we tell them that. But I was oh gosh, who was it? Last week I was interviewing some friends that I've interviewed before, and I did a whole series of them. I can't remember if this was Richard Murray or Keith Giles, Don Keithley, one of them. But we came to the mutual agreement that pretty much everything we learned in traditional religion was just 180 degrees wrong.
Yeah.
And nice people, wonderful people, God loves it. And what I taught was 180 degrees wrong, but just misinformed, misguided people who don't have a revelation of the truth. And just, man, you can just go down the line, almost every single thing. And that's a whole lot of stuff piled upon a whole lot of more stuff that it can be hard to wade through, can it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just finished up. I won't even say finished up. We're about 2/3 of the way through 12 weeks of covenant theology in our school. And that's one of the things that we have to do. Our students always say we wouldn't have to have a school if we didn't have to unlearn stuff. That's what we spend most of our time doing, is unlearning traditional religion. I'm preparing for this evening where we're talking about death and how death has been celebrated as a savior. Everything that Jesus promised us is what we say at funerals we receive from death. They don't cry anymore. They're not in pain. They're not heartbroken. They're not part of the pain of this world anymore. And Jesus came to have life, or give us life and life to the full, but we think that life isn't available until we die. That's just simply not the case. But I would agree with you. And I think there's been an all-out assault on the message of life and grace through religion and death. The Bible says that where there is no law, there is no transgression. And it says the strength of sin was the law, and the wages of sin is death. So legalism, I think it's 2,847 years, God dealt with man with no law whatsoever. And the only way that we know him and understand him in the Western culture is through that short time under the Mosaic Code where he had one. And for some reason, we define him by that instead of his unrelenting pursuit of us since the garden.
And he only gave us that law because we refused a relationship with him. And he said, okay, if that's what you want, try this.
Yeah. How terrible is that too? I finished a product or a project for the New Creation Covenant, and there's a session in there called The Wrath of God with a question mark at the end. And it goes through 3 circumstances before Exodus 19, and then 3 circumstances after Exodus 19. And before Exodus 19, they got hungry, so God gave them bread. And they got thirsty, so God gave them a tree to throw in the water so it would become sweet. And they gathered on the Sabbath, so God promised to give them twice as much on the day before the Sabbath, so they didn't have to work. The only things that God asked them to observe before the Mosaic law was the Passover, because that's the day they were set free, and the Sabbath, because they had been under 7-day work weeks under Pharaoh making bricks through their entire generation. So the only thing God wanted to celebrate with them was freedom and rest. That's all he asked for. And then he asked them to come up the mountain, become a nation of priests. You're going to be my people. I'll be your God. All you have to do is celebrate freedom and rest with me. And I will even drive the inhabitants of your promised land out with bees, so you don't have to swing a sword. And then they refused it. And they requested an inferior covenant, which we could get into for a long time. But that's when you start seeing the wrath of God, when they started asking for it. Immediately after he agreed to that kinship covenant with them, the same things happened. They grumbled because they were hungry, and God killed them because he was forced to by the covenant they were in. There was a time that they were thirsty, and God sent serpents into their camp. And then they found a guy gathering sticks on the Sabbath. And God said, this man must surely be put to death. So God's wrath was never part of his nature. It was demanded of him by humanity.
Wow.
And once he fulfilled that covenantal moment, through Christ, and that's another strange thing that maybe we could or couldn't say. The blood sacrifice of Jesus did nothing for Gentiles. It satisfied a demand on the Jewish people that they created through the Levitical process. But his death, burial, and resurrection gave us life. But where there's no law, there's no transgression. So if we weren't under the law, the only way we can get in is by believing. So after he satisfied all that, then the wrath of God, according to man's request, is no more. Like, it's just not part of his nature. And it's wild to think it is.
Yeah. Did you you yourself come up with the curriculum for your school?
I did. Yeah, I wrote the curriculum for the school. I've got some tremendous influences. Chris Blackaby is a tremendous teacher. He's probably one of the best new creation teachers. He's also one of my closest friends. But yeah, I've written everything. I haven't found, I just started Global Grace Seminary, so I haven't found a pre-written thing that I think would be suitable for what I'm trying to accomplish. So yeah, everything I've written, I've taken some things from David Duncan, and Jonathan Welton does some really good covenant teachings. But yeah, I just kind of resourced myself from a lot of their material, but then just responsibly approaching the Bible. I think the Bible has way more life in it to offer than Grace folks give it credit for. They just have to see it through the right lens.
Do people at your school come to stay there, or are they people in the local area that come in during the day?
So far they're local. I'm working on something global right now. It's going to be separate from the school. The reason we don't want to offer the school online. We've been asked for years to do it, but the reason we keep it local is we see that place in Romans where Paul, obviously Romans is like the most well-constructed epistle that Paul wrote. And even at the end of it, he said, I want to come to you so that I can give you an impartation. So a lot of what that school offers is the community, and the chance to argue, for lack of a better term. We don't leave the school on uncommon grounds. We have the chance to reconcile things and bring up places where it challenges our current belief system and actually work stuff out. And sometimes when you just throw some theology out online, people can misinterpret it, not ask questions based on their paradigm, and then leave. So the school is an in-person thing. People aren't coming to stay at the moment. People are driving a really long way. We've got some folks hour and a half, 2 hours away that come every Sunday and every Tuesday. Yeah, it's.
So you're going to have school today after we get, well, guys, thanks for making the time to get together today.
Yeah, we have school this evening. It's going to be a great night. Probably one of the best we've ever had.
Wow. Well, let's talk some more about this in our next episode. It's about time to close up for now. It's been wonderful, Tommy, and we'll stop the recording in a minute, and then when you all who are watching and listening see us next time, it'll look like it's been several days apart, but we're wearing the same clothes, and there's a reason for that. I say that about every time I do. People are going to get tired of it. I'm getting tired of hearing myself say it. I'm going to quit that. So, Tommy, before we wrap this session up, tell people how they can find you online and where you are.
Sure. So we're not really a product-based ministry at this point. We do most of our stuff live. I think the most effective and beneficial place you could go is to, and I think I supplied Paul with a link, is to be part of the New Creation Collective group on Facebook. And Legacy Church is the name of the church that I pastor. We live stream all of our Sunday mornings on Facebook and YouTube. And yeah, you can access anything we have there. And we just really want to put this message out to as many people as possible.
Great. Well, I encourage people to do that, and myself included. So we'll be doing that, and we'll be talking some more on the next episode of Grace to All with Paul Gray. So, Tommy, thanks a lot.
Honored, Paul. Thank you so much.
And thank all of you for listening and being with us for another edition of Grace to All with Paul Gray, with my friend Tommy Miller. We'll see you next time.